Hi, my name is Genevieve and I illustrate tarot decks. And today I wanted to talk about my latest one, which is called Haunted, an Appalachian tarot deck, which focuses on folklore and ghost stories and dark history from southwestern Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and eastern Ohio. The reason I wanted to talk about this deck is that I want to tell kind of both sides of its creation, both fun, cool, folklore side, but also the how-to side. So I feel like if you are somebody who is interested in making a tarot deck, which I get a lot of questions about it, probably more than anything, I get a lot of questions about how to make a tarot deck, but I also wanted to include some of sort of interesting stories or reasons why I specifically chose this subject matter and how I choose my subject matter. So if you're just curious about what Haunted is and why I made a tarot deck about folklore from this very particular region of America, I could fulfill those questions essentially. And if you have more, you should probably leave comments down below and I can make more videos answering those questions. So with that, I'm going to get started from the beginning. And it's not really the beginning because I've been making tarot decks for about 6 years, and I specifically have been making tarot decks about particular subject matter for a while now. And I don't want to get too in the weeds on that because each of those decks is its own whole video talking about the who, what, where, when, why, how. Needless to say, at this point, I was ready to make my next deck. This is about 2 years ago. Right now, as of recording, it's March 14th, 2024. So yeah, like honestly, roughly 18 months to 2 years ago, I was thinking about what I wanted my next deck to be, and I had a few different ideas, and I wanted to get a sense of what people actually were interested in, because I can be, as an artist, I can get down like a very narrow train of thought that is hard to follow sometimes. So I wanted to make something that had appeal with people. And so I asked folks, I have an email list. I'll include a link to that down below, but I wanted to see what people were interested in. And so I had a few different options. And one of those was about folklore. And overwhelmingly people were like, yes, folklore, yes, ghost stories, yes. They were super interested in that. I was really excited to start that process. And the beginning of any tarot deck that I do is a lot of research. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of looking things up online. And specifically for folklore, there is an element of oral tradition that I wanted to tap into as well. So I interviewed people in real life about either their own experiences or things that they had done research in as well around this topic, which I love the research phase. It's really hard not to get totally lost in it and want to learn. And I love reading, I love learning, I love the whole thing. But I also realized at this point that when I was doing this, having made several other decks, that I didn't want to do this completely on my own. I wanted help with parts of the tarot making process that I found to be really arduous and difficult for me to do, or at least I wanted like a sounding board. So I actually wound up approaching a friend of mine who is a tarot reader. She's a generational tarot reader. So her mother reads tarot, her grandmother read tarot, and it's a tradition that's been passed down. She was more than happy to help. She actually had modeled for a previous deck that I'd done. She was already aware of my work and appreciated my work. And so it was really easy to just be like, hey, do you want to do this? And I knew that I wanted to use Kickstarter to fund it. So I was like, I can pay you. Like we can literally build that into the tier structure, or the budget, I should say, of making this deck. And she was totally on board, which was fantastic. So her name is Sarah McKenzie, aka Sora the Intuitive, and she reads cards from her own website. I will include a link down below. I feel like I'm going to say that a lot. And so she became both my research partner, but also I had mentioned I wanted help with things I didn't like about making tarot, and that is writing the guide. I don't enjoy writing guides. It's not that I'm not good at it. I've learned how to do it over the years, but it was one of those things where it just took me forever. And I needed somebody who really knew the cards to go through and be like, yes, this makes sense. Yes, this meaning makes sense. Yes, this is what, when I'm reading a deck, I'm looking for, or when I'm reading a guide, what I would like information on. And so she really became an essential sounding board for that. We started by researching and then creating a big spreadsheet. And none of this sounds sexy right now. So if you're thinking about starting your own tarot deck, I'm not saying you have to do it the way that I do it, but the reason I do it the way I do it is because I have a background in typesetting and graphic design. And within that, I worked for an academic publisher. And within that, we had particular styles and things that we had to adhere to. And that made the process so much easier because when you have an established style, there really isn't any questioning about what direction you go in. It's like, well, does it adhere to the style or not? And so creating that spreadsheet and having specific things that we needed for each card made it very clear sort of the notes that we needed to hit. And if there were any gaps or anything like that, it was clear that they were there and we could address it and sort of have this style guide essentially established. And style is not just about color scheme or fonts. It's beyond that. It's how you talk about something. It's the format of things. It's so much goes into creating your own style that you don't even realize it, which is, I love that kind of stuff. Like that complexity in a project is something that as an artist, I love and I get really sucked into. That is not for everybody. If you just want to draw tarot cards and you don't really want to think about the cohesion aspect of it, then just do it. Like you don't need my permission. Like go off, But I think that, or at least one aspect of my work that is very important is that when somebody uses my product, that there is a cohesiveness to it. That is a major part of my brand and sort of my value system. And so having all of that kind of together and really knowing what it is that I am making and having sort of this baseline, essentially this thread that kind of binds everything together is very important to me. I have funded decks in the past and I've actually been a part of decks that have multiple different styles on the cards. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I personally never use those though. I have them like in my tarot collection, but I don't really use them because they don't really speak to me because they're all over the place, intentionally so. So that's really just to kind of hammer home my particular perspective about how I want to build a deck, and cohesion and style is like a super important aspect of that. We have our spreadsheet. We've started our research. That includes, I'm a big library user, so, and we're really lucky to have such a wonderful, access to so much history and books and other materials beyond just books through the Carnegie Public Library system. And not only that, we were able to kind of take resources there and search through newspapers and through personal accounts. We were on websites that are just clearly somebody's passion project to write about ghost stories that people had heard in small towns across eastern Ohio, southwestern Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And it was amazing. And what I did with my deck is anytime we had inspiration from a particular story. So, and I think this is an important aspect. Folklore itself is not copywritten, but how it is, like the story that is written, right, that is copywritten. So it's really important that anytime we were using a particular story, like there's a few specifically for West Virginia and southwestern PA, we always credited the authors of the stories that we were reading. So, and I have a bibliography that goes with my tarot deck. I don't know if any other tarot deck I know has a bibliography, but that was really important to me. I don't even know if it's something that's like required, but it just felt right to me to be like, this is where I got my information. And that includes when I did interviews as well. So I've had cards that I didn't read anything about it. I didn't find any sort of online resource or book resource, but I had spoken to people or had my own personal experience. And so I would credit that in there. So getting all of that organized, all in our spreadsheet. Then when does the fun part start? I love the research part. I love spreadsheets. I know it's wild, but the fun part, the drawing part, starts within all of that. So when I'm drawing these cards, I bring them all up. That's the kind of way I think about it. I feel like there's going to be phrases that I use that people are going to be like, what does that mean? And it's just how I think about how I work. I bring up the cards all around the same time. So I had maybe, and for this particular project for Haunted, I really wanted to get a certain amount finished to then launch the Kickstarter, but I didn't want to finish the whole deck because I knew that I wanted people to fund being in the deck. That was like a level of the Kickstarter to become a card in the deck. And so I wanted to leave a lot of options open for people. So I don't even remember how many cards I had finished, but it was like a pack of cards. I think I went through one particular suit. I think it was the cups suit. And I don't even have a reason for starting with cups. I think it was just like when I started putting together the stories in the spreadsheet and thinking about the meanings of each of the cards, like those stories kind of, I just started towards the cups. And I think I did all of the aces. Yeah, I had designed all of the aces at that point as well, because I knew that I wasn't going to have people be aces. I had a particular idea for the aces, which is to do native animals to the region. So I picked a bunch of cards and started drawing them all at the same time. And that's where I generate my palette for this. And I also was using very particular Procreate brushes. So I work in Procreate on an iPad Pro. And I also will start in my sketchbook. I'll do like thumbnails sometimes in my sketchbook, but not always. And so yeah, my process specifically was drawing. So once the research part, I have enough research that I feel like I can start drawing, which the research never really ends. Like it's kind of this constant cycle. So what I'm sort of describing is really a cycle. It's not a linear timeline. I would have my story, start sketching either in my sketchbook or start playing around in Procreate, and I'd come up with some ideas. And as I came up with them, I was using it's called, oh my gosh, Chromograph was the name of the brush set that I had started using. And the reason I wanted to use it, I'm pretty sure I got it through Texture Supply Company, which is a great resource for some beautiful natural kind of textures. I always have like a particular aesthetic kind of in mind with each of my decks. And for this one, I wanted a more graphite charcoal aesthetic to it, even though I do wind up kind of going more the painterly route in the end with a lot of them. I wanted to start with these really soft textures that felt almost like aged photographs. That was like a huge aspect of this, and Texture Supply just has some really cool stuff. They also have some really interesting elements that you can add that make the drawing look like it's like cracked or faded or a vignette style. So I really loved that, and I wanted to play around with that in this deck. I had the Procreate brushes that I wanted. I used specifically the drawing references that I use. I have particular websites and resources for that, one of which is Graphite Studio, which is a artist photographic reference website that and I buy it off of Gumroad. You don't have to use the one that I use. There's so many through ArtStation, Gumroad. I also use a website called reference.pictures, which is pretty cool. And it's really just vibes. Like I honestly was like, oh, okay, yeah, like this one reference pack that has zombies in it, or this one that has beautiful gowns. There's one that's like literally just about period piece gowns. Especially when it comes to artistic references, you have to be really, really careful because you can't just like get something randomly off the internet and just copy it. The fair use doesn't necessarily apply to that. So a lot of my stuff, I'm really kind of, I'm making sure that I pay for the reference, or if it's in the case of like, there is no such thing, like I cannot find like this particular period, I'm basically Frankensteining it together and kind of designing my own, which like concerns me sometimes because there's like a lack of historical accuracy. But then I remind myself that like the point isn't necessarily to be so intensely historically accurate. Instead, it's to tell the story as authentically as I can. And, you know, it's really kind of doing the best that I can. I mean, I wish there was like a better way of putting it, but hopefully I don't get skewered by the internet. But it's important to me to be as accurate as possible, but also not to completely I can get so focused on that sometimes that like I am not paying attention to the aspect of the card that matters the most is, can people read it? Does it make sense visually, etc.? So if something really isn't working, I would just be like, well, this isn't right. So I just need to move on and try something else, like approach the drawing in a different way. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. It's like a lot. I have like a script that I've like written everything down with like how I do stuff. But honestly, like there is a certain like stream of consciousness that I rely upon in order to execute the work that I make. I have, as I'm working on each of these cards, I'll start 5. I'll kind of cycle through them and sort of, again, bring them up. So I go from like the sketch phase to what I call like the form and shape phase to the refinement phase. Within all of this, I'm thinking about color, I'm thinking about light, I'm thinking about does this make sense for a tarot card? The two questions that are like the most important things I'm thinking about when I'm drawing tarot. Is this tarot enough? Is this thematically accurate? I think it's easier if I just grab an example from the deck. First card. So this card, the King of Swords, is Fanny Sellens. So you might first be saying, well, why is it this card a woman and it's king? In my decks, I love to defy the gender boundary, and I think that the concept of a king always being male is dumb, basically. So I don't really adhere to that, especially within tarot, where like king has a particular meaning to it, and it's not necessarily, in my opinion, the qualities of manhood, I should say. I think that women can be masculine, and I think men can be feminine, right? Like there's energy within like the gender boundary, basically, is what I'm saying. So Fanny Sellens was a organizer, part of the United Mine Workers Union. She was hired by them to come and help organize in our region here in Pittsburgh, specifically up in the Allegheny River Valley, which now today would be Breckenridge, Natrona Heights. She was known as somebody who would help a woman to have her baby, like essentially be a midwife in the morning, and then by the afternoon go out onto the picket lines to help organizers strike for fair wages and for essentially what we have today, the weekend. And she's one of the like OG fighters essentially for these privileges that we have today, right? I knew that I wanted her to be the King of Swords. It was really important to me, specifically as her role as an organizer, and lent itself really well to King of Swords. So when I was drawing her, it kind of came pretty naturally, like which card I wanted her to be a part of. And I had drawn her before for a different thing. So I was like, I already knew about her and I really was excited about it. I had found her in this random book that was written by a man who was a homicide detective up in New Kensington. And he was just writing about the history of organized crime in the Allegheny River Valley, and had mentioned in sort of the history leading up to what became the time of organized crime in that area. He had mentioned Fanny Sellens as somebody who lost her life while picketing. So I was like, this story is one that really needs to be told. It's a dark history. It's not, there's nothing folkloric about it in the sense that like it really did happen. All of these things did happen. And I thought they were important. And they fit into this theme of haunted in the sense of like the things that she did and the things that she was a part of impacted the trajectory that history took after, she was gone. So that's kind of how I decided to put her in the deck. And then as I was drawing this card, it's one of those things where, again, it was like and actually she was one of the first that I did too, because again, I knew her and I knew I wanted her in the deck. So I put her in this role and then I draw this card and I'm like, okay, cool. Then I kind of walk away from it and I start working on other things. I'm working on, especially at that time, I think I had started Mothman at that point. This is Mothman. I don't know if you can see this, Page of Swords. I definitely had started this one at that point. And it was this is the Johnstown flood. And this is Clara Barton in the Red Cross outfit, which was not actually what she wore, but again, it's needing to kind of symbology versus like historical accuracy. It's a whole thing. And again, this was going to be in cups. So I'm working on all these different cards. And then another part of my process is just being here in this region and being influenced by it. And so I remember distinctly working on this particular card and driving around Pittsburgh, going back and forth between my studio. And my studio is in McKees Rocks. And when you're driving over the Weston Bridge, or when you're driving down West Carson, actually headed towards 376, you get these absolutely stunning views of the hills that we have here that, I'm always looking at, I'm always thinking about. I don't know, I just find them so beautiful. And so the thing I keep thinking about with this card is like, how am I going to like reference these hills, right? How am I going to capture this idea of, I don't know, their beauty, their hauntedness, their creepiness, their, especially like I tried to include some of this fog as well. So yeah, and so what I did is I used these particular textures that come with the brush pack that I was insistent upon using and kind of include that into the background. I'll work on it, then I'll walk away from it, then I'll come back to it. And this continues on and on and on for all 78 cards over and over and over again. I'm kind of cycling through, switching things around up until probably the last couple weeks before I sent this to the printer. I had both the 10 of cups and the 10 of, not the ones, not swords, must be coin. Yes, coins, cups and coins. I kept being like, maybe this one is better for this. Maybe this one is better. I continued to flip flop them. That's really dangerous. It's a great way to have a misprint. But what's great, and kind of the next aspect of making a tarot deck, is that throughout the entire printing process, you're given opportunities to look over your deck and make sure that it's right. And you should never skip on that ever. You should always, always, always 100% double, triple, quadruple check everything, including the spelling, including, the card placement. Like, is this the right one? Make sure you don't have duplicates somewhere. It's like, and I know that all sounds really complicated, and it is. And as much as it gives me anxiety and keeps me up at night, and it was actually, especially towards the end of this process, really hard to stay asleep. I would go to sleep at night and be woken up by thinking about, oh my gosh, what if something happens? Like, what if this, It was a lot. I still love it. There's a part of my brain that loves solving this type of problem. Go figure. So I hope that gives you an idea of specifically drawing the deck, and making a bunch of different decisions about it. I have this one. I particularly had these beautiful silver edges. When I like I said, I used Kickstarter to fund this, and I'll talk about that in a second. I'm not going to go into the full details of that because Kickstarter is a whole video on its own. But I will say that people had given me the feedback of oh, why don't you do a fun color, a holographic, or whatever edges? And I was like, that does not fit the aesthetic of this deck. I know that those are really cool, and it makes it feel ultra special and rare when something has holographic edges or metal cold press kind of stuff. And I was like, that is not what this deck is about. So it does not fit aesthetically with it. And I am far more interested in this thing as a whole than just having one little trick in it that people, for whatever reason, value more than sort of the aesthetic as a whole. So it doesn't mean that I won't ever do holographic edges on a tarot deck. It just has to make sense with the piece. So yeah, the other aspect of making a tarot deck is that you have to do the guide, which I talked about before and I don't enjoy doing. But what we would do is, Sarah and I, is we'd sit down and be like, okay, we need to make sure that when people use this guide, they understand the meaning of the card. So if they're using it to read, that's clear. That being said, we made sure that it hewed as closely as possible to the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, because in my opinion, say for instance, you don't have the guide or you want to challenge yourself to go off it, I think that if you have an understanding of the Rider-Waite-Smith format, then you won't be lost. You know what I mean? And that's what most decks that people have access to are related to. Maybe not entirely, but for the most part. Because as much as I want this to be aesthetically, sorry, that was loud probably. As much as I want this to be aesthetically pleasing and cool looking, I also want it to be functional. That is a very important aspect of this. So next is talking about the Kickstarter. Again, I'm going to be kind of brief with this and just give the basic ideas, just to give you guys an understanding of what I did. Again, what I do is not necessarily what everybody should do, but it's what I did. So when I was finally at a point where I knew that I had proof of concept and I wanted to get this thing funded, I decided to use Kickstarter for the first time. And I had waited to use Kickstarter for a really long time. I wanted to make sure that what it was that I was creating was going to be good enough, which I know sounds so lame, but I wanted it to be a product I was really excited about, really proud of. And before that, all of my decks were self-funded through print on demand. I used a variety of different companies, including Drive-Through Cards, which is based here out of the US. I had used makeplayingcards.com, which is based in, I believe, Southeast China, and all to varying degrees of success. The reason I stopped using Drive-Through is because they just didn't have the bells and whistles. The thing about makeplayingcards.com is that their cost per unit is really, really high. But it was the only one I really knew of. So I went into my first Kickstarter using that, and my budget was like $75,000. It was insane. So that did not fund. That did not get anywhere near where it was supposed to. And my friend who was really good with Kickstarter, who had been successful with other campaigns, was like, well, you should be reaching out to other tarot creators and just asking them to share your stuff. It's a really common thing that people do. You're not bothering people. Like, a lot of people do this. They'll won't be surprised that you do it. And people were very kind. But then there was one person in particular who was like, I don't think you're going to fund, but let's talk about your thing when you're done. And I was like, okay. And he was right. I didn't fund. So we had a conversation, and he actually turned me on to a different printer that I was able to get the same quality product, but at a much, much lower cost because of their structure with how many decks that you're supposed to order. And also, they're not a print on demand, where print on demand is going to be more expensive because you're able to order just like one deck for $200 or $500. I don't even remember what the unit, it was really high. It was like $12 or something like that, which if you're looking on Amazon at any like tarot deck, it's like you can get a tarot deck for $12, you know, so obviously their unit cost is like significantly lower. So printing is a very complicated thing. There is no one set price for things. It really depends on who's making it, what resources they have, and they kind of dictate like, you know, how your minimum order, all of these different things, which I would go into again in its own video. So I was able to completely rework my Kickstarter and relaunched it. I think I launched my first one in January and it failed at the beginning of February. I relaunched this one in March and finished it in April. And I was amazed. It was like a night and day. I was able to fund it and hit the ground running. And that's when I needed to finish all the other cards, which I knew that I could do in the time allotted. The biggest hiccup, well, it wasn't really a hiccup because I had a feeling it was going to take a while. I feel like I'm the only Kickstarter person I've ever known that has not had serious delays, because I really have gone through with my previous decks every possible conflict, delay, and issue. So I really kind of built a lot of that stuff in. So I knew it was going to take a few months to get my Become a Card tier, which I had 21 people doing that, to wrangle those cats, which it did take a while. And like life happens, you know, people are really excited to fund a deck, but then they also have their own lives. And so, you know, it really took me and Sarah a lot of time, not drawing, not making anything, but organizing data, collecting data, meeting with people, like all of the unsexy stuff. But we wound up getting all of that done. And the whole time I'm also still like drawing and trying to find as much time as possible. And the truth is you will never get a full uninterrupted day of drawing. Like, or at least I never do. It is always fitted in where you can. And I would even bring my iPad to like trivia night, you know, and sit there and draw and like answer questions. Or I would bring, I mean, I brought my iPad literally everywhere, and any spare moment that I had, I'd whip it out and just start working on stuff. And that works well for me because, again, if I'm bringing up these cards at different times, I need some time to kind of like step away, think about it a little bit. And I need new eyes. You know, we talk about that a lot in this one water color class that I took, where it's like, if it doesn't look right, don't keep sitting there and working it. Like, you gotta look away, go look at something else, literally take a few minutes, take a walk. If you're a smoker, take a smoke break. If you're a runner, take a little lap, you know, like, if you have a dog, go take a walk, you know, and then you'll come back and you'll be like, oh, okay, I can see, you know, you need new eyeballs for it. So that it was just months and months of that. The other aspect of this is that I have developed a repetitive stress injury in my arm, in my shoulder specifically, from all of the drawing. It was actually specifically from a deck that I made during the pandemic that just ruined me. And so I really had to be careful. I can't do full 8-hour drawing days. Like, my arm can't take it, you know, so kind of splitting that stuff up. So working. At the same time, trying to figure out backer kit. Oh my gosh, a whole thing. Again, I'm going to make a whole video about that because I feel like I just want to help people that like are doing that for the first time. And if I can figure it out, anybody can figure it out. Yeah, we played the story shuffle towards the end to be like, does this make sense? Is this tarot enough? Does this hew to the meaning of the card enough? Does this give enough of the original story within it? Or, is it authentically that story? And all of that culminated in finally sending out the deck in the beginning of October. I'll just say, me personally, what I had going on at that time was my brother was getting married, which was a big deal. And it turns out like my dad was hospitalized around that time. And so he was in and out of the hospital at that time. We didn't really understand what was going on. And then by 2 weeks after his wedding, I was getting proofs back from like a digital proof, and also needed to pick things like, what do you call it? The foiling for the box at that time. And my dad passed away suddenly. So I say all of this because that's what was really happening at that time. It was a lot, but it was nice to actually have something to work on and to focus on and to, deal with that wasn't. So I went home, obviously, and as I'm there with my family and we're figuring out arrangements for my father, I'm in the hotel room, like picking the foil for this for this deck and asking my sister-in-law, what do you think? What do you guys think? I feel like I can't think straight. It was just like complete and total whiplash. Like October of 2023 was one of the longest months of my life. I spent a week at home, in a hotel room, trying to help out my family, and my family trying to all of us help each other out. It was just a lot. And yeah, but again, this wasn't delayed. By that point, like the deck was out, and it was really just a matter of them kind of sending me stuff. And so it's going well, work-wise, just not personal wise. Yeah, it was a lot. So we wound up getting the final order for decks. I finally ordered them in November. And then we got them the very first week of January. And then I was able to fulfill them. When I had initially set up the Kickstarter, I had said something along the lines of like, because we're relaunching, this won't be in time for Christmas. If I had funded in January, there was a chance I could have gotten them out by Christmas. But because I was delayed in kind of getting, well, not delayed, but because the first one didn't fund and I had to relaunch and kind of refigure stuff out, I knew that it wasn't going to happen within 9 months. It just wasn't. And people were cool with that. So I was like, okay, January, February is fulfillment. And we fulfilled the last of our decks at the end of February. So I really feel like I nailed the timing. I was like kind of surprised that I was able to do that. I think for the people who funded it, they thought it was like this crazy long period of time. But for me, it was a very short amount of time and I was very busy the whole time. Within that year, we had a lot of family travel, kind of being together, which was really great before my dad's unexpected death. I was just, I don't know how I did this. I'll be honest. Like, I think that's kind of why I'm telling the story, because I don't really know how 2023 even happened. Like, it feels like a total fever dream. This is going to sound totally nuts, but having finished it, I'm now thinking about what I want to do next. And people were asking me that while I was still fulfilling the deck. And I was like, I'm not thinking about doing anything, but now I actually am. And so, I think actually over the next year, I'm going to go back into some of the decks that I've made previously, and I'm going to be remastering them. One of them is called Bridge Witches, a tarot deck, which is specifically about Pittsburgh. And I created that deck with the idea of thinking about like, what is the definition and the idea of a Yinzer, the stereotype of a Yinzer, and kind of confronting that and talking about America's most livable city and just taking a real look at like what it's like to really live here and all of the beauty and the complications and the awesomeness that is Pittsburgh, but also the dark side of it too, and including some of that history that I also have in Haunted. Haunted is like my more regional deck and very focused on folklore and ghost stories and dark history. But Bridge Witches is like a celebration meets some of that, not so much ghost stories, but like history. The other one that I have is called Inferno, and it's a tarot deck about hell. I made the first one during the last presidential election cycle, and I'd like to do it again for this one. And I kind of combined the ideas that created the environment for Dante Alighieri to write Inferno, and I compared those to what was happening today, 700 years later, something like that. When Dante was writing the Divine Comedy, the Catholic Church was getting really involved with politics. What we know now as capitalism was starting, and there was just so much like happening that led to his exile and then him writing Inferno and the entire Divine Comedy. And I was looking at that and kind of comparing to what's happening today. And I was like, there's just so many different things that you could, it's like the cycle. And that's what tarot is. And that's kind of where I'm going to end, because I've been blabbering on for a while and hopefully this video makes some kind of sense. Tarot is a cycle. It's a cycle of stories about what it means to be human. And I think there's so many different ways that I can approach that I want to approach that. And that's why I make what I make. So hopefully you found this interesting and remotely helpful to understand what Haunted is, but also how I made it and sort of the backstory behind it. And I appreciate you checking this out, and hopefully you'll come back for more. You should like and subscribe and share and blah, blah, blah. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.